Hello, the name is Osvaldo Antonio Nyaka, and welcome to one of another short video where we just an enlightenment video is what I love to call these, where we just discuss principles that govern human behavior, and the goal around this video is to help you apply and implement some things that we discuss that we have done a lot of research on. And this research comes from the work that I also do that is based on the DiMartini method, as well as some principles around psychology and philosophy as well. And today love to talk about the techniques that help you to change the story that you tell yourself. This is all about the stories that we run in our heads that tend to run us. So this means if you've ever had an experience in the past, and this experience tends to be the driving force around the decisions that you make in avoiding or seeking things that are based on the story, that based on the experience rather that you've had. So this is the story that you're running in your head. And what I've discovered working with a number of people is that the stories that we tell ourselves tend to affect the decisions that we make. These stories that we run in our heads tend to be the driving forces that we attach meaning to. And if these stories go unchecked or unbalanced, they actually tend to put us in places where we seek and avoid things. In seeking and avoiding, we tend to seek pleasure and then avoid pain around the story that we tell ourselves. And from what I've discovered with the DiMartini method, using it on myself and others, is that anytime your ideas and your thoughts are unsteadied, they are being run by the emotional biases that you have. And these emotional biases are triggers that go back to certain events that happen, or they could have a central theme or central story or event that happened. And every other event that happens thereafter then becomes a mirror effect of the main story that is running in your mind or in your head through your ideas and your thoughts. There was a philosopher back in Greece or Greek. His name was Epictetus. And Epictetus taught us two things. One is life is about love and strive. When you're in the consciousness of strive, you're struggling to make decisions, you're struggling through life. And when you're in the consciousness of love, you are embodying everything that's around you and seeing things from both sides and accepting things and being grateful for what is happening in your life. Then he also taught us that when something happens in our life, first we tend to blame others, then we blame ourselves, then we tend to transcend the blame game and then see that this is just part of the huge cosmological puzzle or the universal way of doing things, that there's no blame either to ourselves or others. And in these stories that we run in our heads, they are normally triggered by either the things that we perceive we have done or the things that we perceive have been done to us. I had a personal experience about 2 to 3 years ago where I got separated from the person that I believed at that particular moment in time was supposed to be the love of my life, supposed to grow together with the person. And what happened in between that, I did the normal thing where you go to therapy, you see a therapist, and within seeing the therapist, I think I saw therapists for there were about 3 or 4 different sessions that I saw the therapist with. And the techniques that were used there were more of talk therapy. Now, how talk therapy normally works is I go in, I tell my story, and I say, well, this is currently what's happening to me. And I describe the scenario, the event. And after that, they asked me how I felt. And I told them, this is how I feel about the certain event. And this is the story. And so for that particular hour, That's what happened. Then I go back in again, and then they ask me how I'm feeling about myself and what is happening currently at the moment, and how do I feel about the particular event or story that was happening. And I would talk and say, well, this is how I feel today about it. This is where I am with the thought process, and it'll be a dialogue with the therapist. The therapist will then tell me, okay, you can implement this, you can implement that. And in the process, there was one particular session that I enjoyed, which was when the therapist actually asked me, where is it that you can gain your power back? And that is where the whole process actually changed for me. And in no way am I trying to say that therapy is not needed. Therapy is needed, and there are different techniques that one can use. But my experience with that particular therapy type, it did help, and it worked the way it worked for me at that particular time. But what I found is that type of therapy, I normally classify that type of therapy as time on the couch therapy, where essentially I was going in there, and every time I went in there, I kept retelling the same story, just from different angles. And the downside to that is that if I'm feeling particularly good at that particular week or on that particular moment, what tends to happen is I will look at the same story from a different angle. So if I am in a good mood, and I'm talking about my separation, what will tend to happen is I will see it from a happy place. And if my week goes bad and I go into the therapy session, what tends to happen is I'm looking at the same story, but I'm looking at it from a loss perspective. And that is where I really love the DeMartini method, because with the DeMartini method, the same story, same scenario, what I help myself with is actually taking myself through the whole process, which is the 14 question process. And in that process, this is what I then discovered, that the moment I'm looking at things from one side, I am being run by that story. But the moment I'm able to order my thoughts and ideas and see things from both sides, and that is from the positive and the negative side, and integrate both sides, the story no longer runs me. And that is because when I look at the story that was being told, or what the story that I was telling myself, was that the judgments that were happening in there were judgments against the actions that I took versus the actions that the person took against me as well. So in other words, I had judgments against the traits that the person displayed towards me. And in the process of identifying those traits, I no longer was running the label. So the label there was, I'm being separated. Now, separation is a very broad label. And what we tend to do with the method is we tend to go in and dissolve the label and actually ask ourselves, what are the judgments that you're having on yourself or others according to the trait? So for example, the trait there could be that the reason why I got angry and wanted to separate was because the person was perhaps putting me down. In identifying the trait of putting me down, I'm then able to go in there and then see where I've actually done that trait or displayed that trait to the same degree as the person that I'm having a judgment on. And the moment I'm able to do that and accept that, I then go in and see that, oh, I also display this trait in as much as the opposite person does. And that then calmed down the judgments that I had towards the other person and the judgments that I had towards myself. Because anytime you perceive that a person is doing something that you resent, you will actually put yourself in a pedestal thinking that you don't do the same thing. But in actual fact, you display the same trait. By doing that, I no longer put the person on the pit for the things that I judge to be bad. And now I raise them up to see, okay, I also do this to the same degree, to the same quantity as this person. Then on the opposite end, the things that I was infatuated with, we took those things in, or I took the things in, and actually saw that I do the same things to the same degree. So I was no longer infatuated with what the person was doing in the relationship, because I'm now reflecting that whatever that person has, I have it within myself. And the moment that then went in, the labels started to fall away, because I was at the state of a reflective consciousness. A reflective consciousness, Arthur Schopenhauer speaks about it. It says that man's highest consciousness is having a reflective consciousness. And the animal mind is not able to have that reflective consciousness. That's why with an animal, you're able to train it to do something. And every time you do something, it has a way that it will continuously react. So I was in the animal brain, or the animal mind, when I was rerunning the same stories over and over again. But because of that reflective consciousness that we all have the ability to do, once I reflected on the traits that I admired about my partner, and as well of the traits that I resented in my partner, I was able to calm down the voices in my head and actually see that whatever I was infatuated with, I have, and whatever I was resented in the person, I also display it and have it. And therefore, then it allowed me to go through the process and then ask myself, what are the drawbacks to the things that I was infatuated with? And what were the benefits to the things that I resented in the next person, this being my partner at that particular time? And once that went in there, I was able to come out of there and then come out with a state of gratitude. And in the state of gratitude, I no longer wanted to change the person for what they did, or to change the person for the things that they did not do. So I was then in a state of grace and in a state of presence, and I had clarity for what my mission was. And at that specific point, then my story changed. My story no longer was a person who's in separation, but instead a person who's in the process of transforming themselves. And so the judgments then went down, and those labels then were then dissolved. And that is because we as human beings have the power to ask ourselves quality questions, and the quality of our lives is dependent on the questions that we ask ourselves. And I tend to experience that with therapy, we don't emphasize on actually showing people what questions to ask themselves. So we don't necessarily guide them to the right questions to ask themselves so that they get over the labels and the stories that they have. And instead, we want to listen to the stories. And when people come to me, what I teach them, I don't teach them to stick to the story, but we are there to get rid of the story so that by the time the session ends, we're then able to now relabel what you're going through, and actually you'll see that it's nothing but the transformation. Remember the example of Epictetus, that he said that we first blame others, then we blame ourselves, and then once we transcend others and ourselves, we then see that everything is just part of this cosmic puzzle, or everything is a universal principle that we're all going through, and everything is just a transformational process, no matter what it is. And what I found is, with our human psyche works by meaning, and the things that we give meaning to affect how we perceive things, and how we perceive things then affect how we take actions on certain things. If I came to you and I told you that someone in my life, I just lost someone, and you derive a meaning to that to be like, oh no, that means that now you're going without, I will act in that way, or you will perceive that I'm living my life without something. Whereas if we go in there and I tell you the same thing, that, well, I've just lost someone, and we say, okay, what is the meaning of loss? And we give it another definition, be like, okay, there is never a loss without a gain. Then we tend to look at where was the equal gain as the loss. And once those two are then integrated, the story then changes. And that's the actual power that we have. We have our power. We have the actual power to change our perception and to change the way we perceive things. And the moment we change the way we perceive things, the greater our power and our ability comes. But that only comes by actually asking the right questions, and questions that integrate the conscious and the unconscious mind. And this means the moment we're able to ask integrating questions, questions that bring things together, the mind is then not driven by the emotional biases of either gain or loss or pleasure and pain, but instead is driven by the reality and the actuality of things. And remember, just like Heraclitus says, that all reality is a function of polar opposites, that you will never ever get one without the other. You'll never get a pain without a pleasure. You never get a loss without a gain. It's these integrations. And my favorite definition of love, again, comes from the Demartini method, or Dr. John Demartini, that love is a synthesis of complementary opposites. And once we're able to integrate opposites, we're then able to be in a state of gratitude and love. And when we're in that state, we're in the state of being present with whatever it is that is going on in our lives. And just remember that the actuality of your life is greater than any fantasy that you can impose on your life. The actuality of what your life is and what your life represents is greater than any fantasy that we can impose in your life. And these fantasies of having a one-sided universe or one-sided self, those are just fantasies that when we look at them realistically are just illusions. And those illusions can cause symptoms of anger, aggression, because it's trying to teach us that you cannot be one-sided, the universe cannot be one-sided, and you can't expect others to be one-sided either. Life is all about embracing the dynamic equilibriums that life comes with. Yeah, so how you retell your story is you go in there and you find these integrating opposites. If your story is, well, I've had this trauma, this perception of trauma, go in there and identify what is the actual perception of the trauma, and push yourself to see the trauma from both sides by asking those integrating questions. And just remember once again that your life is something that is amazing, and no fantasy imposed on your life is ever greater than the reality of your own life. So thank you, and we'll talk soon.